find like find another target over here on the king side. But first, before you do anything like that, you need to really strengthen these two things, because your construction here is very delicate. Like, this bishop is barely defended, and it needs to be here, and this pawn is barely defended. Hang on one second. Let's see if things are working again. Defended, and it needs to be here in this pawn. Yeah, it's definitely back. Okay, good. So if you don't see it, you may need to refresh once. Thanks. All right, so back to this position here. Basically, this pawn here on d6 needs to be defended and is barely defended. And this bishop here needs to be defended and is barely defended. If this bishop has to retreat, it gives black the space to attack this pawn with their rook and their knight, and the pawn just dies. So you really need to be able to maintain this bishop here and this pawn here. So it's very delicate. So before you start throwing other loose moves with like g4, you have to really secure all this. You have to play rook d1 and probably c4 to deal with knight d5s and b5 moves. And then maybe b3 just to have everything defended, just to be safe. And then you can start attacking on the king side, right? So like, for example, if you play a move like g4 too soon, like let's say black just plays, I don't know, rook here, and you play a move like g4 too soon, what about knight takes g4? Right? Because you see, you've barely got your stuff, covered. You have to be very careful when you do that. Okay, knight d7 is playable, but I don't think it helps black in any way, does it? After rook d2, like knight d7, what is it planning to do? To play knight b8, maybe to try and chase this bishop out? Would that be the idea? I mean, you've got the pawn blockaded, but this pawn wasn't threatening to queen. The problem for black is that this bishop is keeping their rooks from moving. So I guess coming to b8 actually makes a lot of sense as a plan here. The options for white are to retreat the bishop this way, or to play c4 and retreat the bishop to a4, because b5 might then lose a pawn. It's interesting. It's like here, here, here. Now black's going to play for b5, I think. So either rook b7 or queen b7. Not saying for sure which is better. Just try one of them. Yeah, this looks viable. It's definitely still a fight, which is cool. Yeah, this seems like a fine idea. Yeah, you can chase the bishop out, maybe even play knight c6 to d4 at some point. Yeah, this is complicated. Black's in this. And alternately, if the bishop goes in the other direction, then black's able to play rook here, attacking this. They can't quite get the knight back out, but they've got the pressure on this. White can barely defend it. Now black just needs to get the queen to one of these squares. Oh, but these two pieces are sort of trapped now. So how would we do that? This is still bad for black, actually. I think, Borkro and everybody else. I might be wrong about it, but I think this is actually still sort of bad for black. Well, maybe black just needs to be aggressive enough to justify everything else. F5. Get some squares for these pieces. Yeah, Borko, you could also try this with like an early c4 by black. This is pretty complicated. Black's got some shots. So here what I'm doing is I'm trying to prevent the knight from coming to d4 with the move bishop a4. You can see how close this actually all is and how it's hanging by a thread. I'm actually like loath to say for sure who's better or worse in the end here. And on the queen c6 option, maybe queen e5 is okay for white. But it's all really hard to say. Yeah, very complicated. Someone's saying maybe bishop to a8. I didn't even see that square, yeah. So there could also be the move bishop to a8. But that's probably just a repetition if the knight comes back through d7 threatening it. I mean, it's hilarious, but it's probably just not super productive for black. Okay. So overall, actually, it's like still messy up to here. I mean, I kind of like a6. This still seemed playable for black. What else would white do? Just retreat their bishop? But then black's got all kinds of defensive options, right? I mean, if white just retreats the bishop and plays like here, and black can have time to come here and put a rook on d8, this pawn should again start feeling weak. Alternatively, the bishop could come here. This way, if black plays b5, you know, you hit at it with a4 or c4 like Adhiban did in the actual game. Yeah, I mean, a move like bishop d5 or knight d5 doesn't seem to do much here against c4 by white. So, yeah, it's still complicated. Okay, so this was like an interesting, this was still like an interesting, complicated position. Not clear if white had the advantage or not out of the opening here. But certainly, like, they reached a playable and actually kind of complicated game. So that's reasonable. I don't think actually we need to go back through anything else in that game. Because basically I can basically tell that, you know, nothing black did before this was too terrible. Like, he got a decent position, white got a decent position. This is kind of what you expect out of a well-played opening by both players. So that's where I'm going to leave that one. I'm going to say that opening by Adhiban looked completely viable. He definitely, you know, exerted some pressure, but there was nothing like wrong with how Van Wely handled that. Seemed fine. So now we'll go on